West Coast Soaring Club. Tonight we have the much anticipated recap of the Red Bull X-Alps finally. Just a year later. It's okay. Just before we get started, though, I just want to mention to everybody that next weekend, weather providing, there is an event at Mount Woodside for it's a paragliding recap of the Red Bull. So if we can finally just be aware that just a year later. It's just so we can be aware that there's probably going to be a little bit extra room and time and whatnot. Next weekend. Now, without further ado, there is an event at Mount Woodside for James is almost ready to set up and get this talk going. I hope everyone's got a lot of questions. We are going to be monitoring for your questions online for people that are not here, and then we'll ask James for you. Now, James, completed this epic journey in almost record time. He was also the only Canadian to actually place and finish in 22nd. Freaking awesome. And we're all super proud, and the team that helped him was just also epic. So yeah, big kudos that goes out to his supporters and James. All right, buddy, let's get this going.
Right on, thanks, Greg. Jeremy, are we good with the with everything? Good. Okay. Okay, yeah, so thank you everybody for coming out tonight. This is, as Greg mentioned, been a long time in the works. Hard to believe it was about a year ago that I got back from the X-Alps, and my plan was to right away do a big presentation when it was still fresh and I was excited, still excited, but there was a lot of excitement around it, and just life has gotten crazy. I have 2 young kids, and basically, in 2023, I front-loaded everything for the X-Alps, and I got home and I was on daddy duty for about 6 months. So it's being pretty full on. So just out of curiosity, how many people have had a chance to watch the documentary, the X-Alps documentary on YouTube? It's okay, cool. And just to give me a little bit of context, I know I can kind of shape some of the commentary here, but quick, presentation format. Closer, like a shake weight? Yeah. Better? Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so format-wise, I was trying to come up with an idea, what could convey the chaos of this race. And PowerPoint just wasn't really cutting it, so I have a few videos. It's mostly videos that I'm going to be narrating, and that'll also keep me on track, because I think the last time I was here, I went about 2 hours for the X-Peer presentation. So this is going to be an hour, I promise. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to break all that down and show you guys a little bit of the chaos. It was definitely a totally bonkers race. Yeah, I can't really do it justice. All I can say is go do it yourselves to really get the full experience. And yeah, any takers? We'll see. Okay, slide, Jimmy. Thanks. So let's get into it. Who was Team Canada? Unfortunately, I can't even start this presentation without mentioning Jonathan Klimau. Many people, I think probably everybody knows, he passed away in Mexico in December from a paragliding accident. So it's a good reality check for us, and a very sobering, unfortunate event that just really, for me, put this race into perspective, some of the risks we took. Yeah, it was tough going through, despite the fact that I had 9 months to put this whole presentation together, or almost a year. Going through all these videos recently is really tough. Jonathan was very, he was, I credit him with so much of our success as a team in the X-Alps. And it's, a huge loss to the paragliding community, a huge loss, to us. And yeah, it was really tough. So I'm going to try to keep it together, and yeah. But in a way, on a positive note, I think having this experience with Jonathan, and I'll get into his role in a sec, which I'm trying to do, it was amazing having him here in the last year of his life, because I think that the X-Alps for him was one of, if not the highlight in his life. He was so passionate about paragliding. Everybody knew from the videos he put together. And like I mentioned, he was just such a positive influence in paragliding across Canada and down in Mexico. So Jonathan supported me in the X-Pier. He supported me, or I raced with him down in the X-Alp, or the X-Red Rocks down in Utah a couple times. And he was becoming a pretty proficient hike and fly pilot himself. So he was my primary supporter. He was the race liaison. He basically was who I was talking to every couple minutes during the entire race for 12 days. I was talking to Jonathan. He was always in my ear. He did my primary navigation, primary logistics, strategic support, and pretty much all of my route planning and everything like that. So yeah, it's tough. But like I said, he's probably the reason we got to the finish. It wasn't myself as a flying. This race is all about strategy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, to Jonathan and yeah. Yeah. So also Dan, he was integral. Everybody was integral. Dan did a great job. Basically, backup nav, backup strategy. He did all the cooking, which is actually quite a bit. And he was also my Sherpa, unfortunately for him, quite a few times. A lot of hiking up, a lot of vertical meters on a lot of these hills. Norm was primarily tasked with driving the RV around those very tight European roads. And this was a maximum stress job. I can't overstate that. It was very maximum stress, and he handled it very well. Only took off a mirror. Actually, minimal damage to the rest of the RV. So everybody survived there. And then Guillaume was kind of an all-rounder, so he pitched in a lot of different areas, did a lot of hiking, carried a lot of my gear. I remember I was doing multiple 1,000-meter hikes every day, and I would be like, Guillaume, here's my 4-liter Camelback, here's all this stuff, and pile about 10 kilos on him, and he complained a little bit, but not too much. And then myself, bit of a background on me. I've just always been incredibly. Oh, sorry.
I just wonder what the rules are about that. Like, obviously, you can't carry your harness or glider, but what if you could just elaborate on?
Yeah, you just had to carry a minimum equipment list, so harness, glider, helmet, reserve, and pretty much everything else was you could just hand off to your supporters. Yeah, we're kind of like princesses.
Bivy bags, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So my flying gear was like 6.5 kilos. Yeah, so it wasn't too bad. Yeah, so my background, as many of you know, I've just been crazy about paragliding for a long time, and then I learned about hike and fly relatively early, 13 or whatever years ago when I started flying, and I just thought it was amazing to be able to combine my passion for physical fitness and hiking and this hike and fly aspect of our sport into one, into me. So the X-Alps was always something that I wanted to do, and this kind of seemed like a good time to do it, even though I had 2 young kids, and probably not the best point in my life to actually do it, but I did. And then a couple honorable mentions as well. It wasn't just us. There were so many people behind the scenes. I got to mention Trevor Kessler, who followed us around through the Alps in an RV as well with his girlfriend. I don't know how he convinced his girlfriend to do that. David Temachuk up in Pemberton did a lot of our software and some programming that we were able to integrate our live tracking into Google Earth, and Jonathan could watch that and make sure I didn't hit airspace. It was pretty amazing. And Tom Keto, who I think may be coming tonight, Did a lot of my software in my app, my navigation app that I was using, so I could actually, navigate around. So there was a ton of people contributed. It wasn't just us as a team. Jeremy, can I get the next slide? So, again, it takes so much to put on a race like this. We had a lot of luck with sponsors. The club here, West Coast Soaring Club, obviously, I consider a lot of my success as a pilot and where I am now to the club. It's just amazing to have events like these and to get together, share knowledge, share expertise. I wouldn't be at the level I'm at if it wasn't for the club. And the West Coast Soaring Club contributed a bit of money, and I was absolutely thrilled to have the logo on my wing. It was amazing. Just as importantly, the moral support through that WhatsApp chat that we had, for those of you who were following, it was amazing to be able to check in and see everybody following, everybody's comments every day. I didn't always have a chance to reply back to those, but it was really cool when I was walking down the road or up over a mountain pass and actually see that. So that was great. My primary sponsor was Advanced Paragliders. I was flying the Omega ULS and their X-Alps gear, which was amazing because this is gear you cannot buy. It's specifically made custom for each athlete. The ULS athlete version is a lighter version of the Omega ULS, and their athlete harness weighs just over 1 kilo, and it's these grams make a big difference in races like these. So it was great to have them on board. A financial sponsor was Pathfinder Asset Management, and they're a specialized investment firm downtown. And Nige is here tonight. Thank you, Nige. So they were the biggest financial partner, and Nige and I also grew up together, as a side note. So yeah, it was great to have them. Paraglide Canada, Norm Kirschmar helped with Advance, setting up that, and was also my same Norm as my supporter. SkySight Soaring Weather, they were providing us multi times a day daily updates for weather. Canada SIV, Adam Chappelle put me through the ringer over a lake just prior to going over there, so I had my SIV skills tuned up. Myo Detox, if you guys are ever in Vancouver and need an RMT, when I was doing all my training and just punishing my body beyond what you could imagine, Val at Myo Detox was doing my RMT stuff, and she volunteered all the time. It was amazing. XC Tracer, Hilks, Christopher Bates, Reathlete, these are all great companies that I think somebody else could approach and probably get some support, again, if there's anybody else thinking about doing this. And last but not least, the GoFundMe. Again, through the West Coast Soaring Club, we raised, the GoFundMe was just under $9,000, and a bunch of people contributed around that, just e-transfer and whatnot. So it was about $10,000 that we raised, that Jonathan set up, Jonathan and Tony, I believe, for the GoFundMe. So that was amazing, and directly related to the club again. So yeah, pretty amazing. Next slide. So race overview. This. There's probably not much introduction needed for any paraglider pilot. The Red Bull X-Alps have been around, it's been around for 20 years now. Billed as the toughest adventure race in the world, which I tend to agree with in the sense that there are many elements of this race which may be surpassed in other events, but when you combine everything together, logistically, physical challenge, the strategic challenge, I think that it probably is one of the toughest adventure races in the world, if not the toughest. And this is the second year that the Red Bull X-Alps has not gone to Monaco. It used to go all across the Alps down to the Mediterranean. And now it is a out and back. So it's about 600 kilometers to the southwest around Mont Blanc and then back through northern Italy primarily. And it's obviously a pretty crazy distance, but looks pretty easy, right? Yeah. Quick note on rules. So this year was 23 was the first time that athletes could choose when they had a rest period. There was a minimum 7 hours every night that you had to be resting for from a safety perspective. but we had a bit of wiggle room. You could choose to start it later, or you could start it a little bit earlier, but you had to be not moving for 7 hours a night. And then the eliminations on the third day and every second day thereafter, the last athlete got eliminated. So we thankfully didn't have to worry about that. No spoilers, but there were a lot of people that did get eliminated from that one. So I have a quick video just to highlight this a little bit more. Jeremy, if you could bring up that one.
The route is one massive loop around the Alps. It starts at Kitzbühel, goes east through Austria, north into Germany, then quickly cuts back into Austria before heading west through Switzerland. The athletes navigate some of the country's highest mountains before turning anti-clockwise around Mont Blanc and start heading back east through Switzerland, then into Italy, across the lakes, and back over the Alps one last time to finish at Zell am See.
There are 15 turn points, so these are places where athletes have to tag. Some of them are on the ground and they have a signboard and they've got to sign their name. Others is a virtual cylinder and they can just pass them in the air.
From here, the athletes can only make progress by hiking or paragliding. The route is one massive loop around the Alps. It starts at Kitzbühel, goes east through Austria, north into Germany, then quickly cuts back into Austria before heading west through Switzerland. The athletes navigate some of the country's highest mountains before turning.
I thought I just heard that one.
James, how many countries did you actually fly in?
All of them. The only one I didn't walk through, to take a different take on that question, was France. I flew all the way through France, around Mont Blanc.
So James, have you flown any of that before?
No,
So that was
never.
first time.
Yeah, totally unfamiliar terrain. Yeah, just send it. Just, just go. There should be a next slide, Jimmy.
Well, James, your custom glider, did it have to go through the certification process? That's the same as
It's certified.
you still have
Yeah,
to
all
get certified.
yeah, all the gear is certified, but they only make 10 for each of the advanced team athletes.
What
Yeah.
about the weight range? Did they try to target it to your weight, or?
They're still standard sizes, but yeah, they will basically, they're still based on the production ULS, but it's they still use the same sizing, I should say. But yeah, it's all just lighter internals and lighter fabric and everything. Jeremy, can you get the next slide there?
The route is.
Yeah, so here's a more detailed look at the route, and I won't get too bogged down in the details, but we have some of the daily distances we managed to do. The longest day, as in the farthest distance we covered, was day 2, and all these purple and blue spots are airspace, and it's a lot more complex than flying in North America or anywhere around here for sure, because there's so much airspace. The red is do not land or do not take off, or both. And for the first time in the Red Bull X-Alps, all of Germany was no takeoff. So you had to, if you landed in Germany, you had to walk to an existing designated takeoff, and that could be 20 or 30 kilometers away from where you land if you bombed out. So this posed a very big problem for us, and I guess the Germans in previous editions of the X-Alps just got tired of X-Alps pilots, just falling out of the sky everywhere and running up a hill and launching off and wreaking havoc in their country or something. So they said nobody takes off from anywhere except a designated launch. The longest leg was just between the turn point at Dufour-Spitz down here and Simatosa, and it was about 235 kilometers, and that puts everything else into perspective. Again, it's about 600 kilometers to Mont Blanc on the far left and all the way back, which is about straight line distance. I think it's about here to Calgary and back. So a lot of terrain to cover. We never know really where we're going to be at the end of the day, which makes it extremely challenging for supporters just to try to keep up in an RV. And some of these days were big days, you know, a couple 100 kilometers. So, you know, being a supporter is not, it's not easy. So.
Were they always there for you?
Always. Literally, yeah.
So you're in radio communication, so they know where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Any questions just at this point? Any other ones? Okay, Jeremy, can I get the next slide? So, oh, sorry, this is the day one video, Jeremy. So enough of all the preamble. This is the race. Maybe done with it. Yeah. So it's been, it took a couple years of training to get to day one of the Red Bull X-Alps. We started in Kitzbühel and basically had a lap through town and then started up the legendary Honeycomb ski hill. And this is me in front of Kriegel. I want to highlight that. It's the only time it happened, probably ever will. And you know, a lot of nerves obviously on the first day of the race, but we did really well with the prologue. So we, as a team, were confident. We thought we could do pretty well, and yeah, nobody was really running up the mountain because it took a while for the day to turn on. Weather was, you know, it looked great, but it was actually quite slow to get started. So once I got up there, I you know, geared up. Again, you know, supporters literally everywhere I went. These guys were in here. I don't know how they did it. And huge crowd on launch. Pretty amazing. It's hard to believe that this is a year ago. There's the West Coast Swimming Club logo there. Thanks, Greg. Now, one thing I really didn't want to do was bomb out on the first valley crossing in the X-Alps race. So apparently neither did anybody else, because the start gaggle, we really just hung out around the start for a long time. And pretty epic thermaling with Kriegel, you know, Patrick Von Cannell, Aaron Durigati, all these legends. So managed to keep it together, and we just, you know, I just waited until somebody made a move. And it was, again, pretty slow going. This is just my track log, but of course everybody else is around. And the first 20 or 30 kilometers of day one, pretty slow. Cloud base was just above ridgetop height, so it was actually quite difficult. And there was a split. Some of the course went to the north, some of us went to the south. I chose the south route. But as you can see from the track log, you know, there's a couple good thermals, but it's, you know, it wasn't a booming day. And later on, it became quite overcast and quite windy. So I ended up getting stuck with a couple low saves and ridge soaring for about 45 minutes with Kingdom Master Lures, and basically just thinking at this point that I might as well be walking, which I caught myself doing a couple times during the race. And as I learned many times, it's never faster to be walking. Always fly if you can. But a couple low saves, and then by this time in the evening, you know, there was quite a bit of wind coming down these valleys, and I just got flushed out. But it was only about 10 kilometers straight line distance from the next turn point, which was, you know, had a little bit of gas in the tank still. That was one day, yeah. There were some suffering moments for sure. So, tagged the turn point, Vaugrain, and then we went out a little bit late that night, made it about 30 kilometers towards Kimsey before we shut it down for the night. And we ended that day, the first day, in 20th position, which I thought was pretty good, and most importantly was a serious buffer from being eliminated, which going into this race was my number one thing. Don't get eliminated. That was my number one concern, and wound up at the next to the Australian team for you know, at the end of day one. So only 11 more to go. There actually were a few people who bombed out, and it took them days to catch up. Some didn't catch up, and yeah, there were some people bombed out. Nobody got eliminated though. The first elimination was day 3. So Jeremy, can I get the day 2 video? So day 2, again, day 1, we made it from here, Vaugrain there for the night. Day 2 was by far the biggest day. Made, thankfully, all through Germany, which was that no landing or no takeoff zone that I mentioned earlier. Day 2, good start to the day. Basically, first thing in the morning, hiked up and over the hill, had a short little valley crossing in order to get into a better position. Yes, and this happens a lot in the X-Alps. Roads are great. They're straight, they're smooth, always power lines around, but you can dodge those for the most part. So what we wanted to do, and what our goal was to try to test our decision making. At this point in the race, day 2, morning of day 2, we knew the weather was going to be good, but we hadn't scouted this terrain. We had no idea, really what the day was going to be like. So we had to make a right call. We had to get in a good position in order to make the maximum flight possible. So I think this was about 8:30 in the morning. After that short flight, Jonathan and I hiked up to the Hochkoning Massif and kind of validated our decision-making process. Yes, we're in a good spot. 8:30 in the morning, or 8:45 in the morning, launching, and it was just this epic massif that we were in front of, and literally thermaling up at before 9 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you should have been a supporter. So absolutely spectacular, and this is Jonathan's drone footage, which I watch all the time, obviously. So from here, we were heading northwest towards Kimsey, and I feel like these track logs always make it look very easy. When you're flying, it's not quite that easy. But we managed to basically use this entire ridge line, and there were a couple rough spots in here, but we also had the benefit of following Paul Guschebauer, who was only about 10 kilometers in front of me at this point. And that happened to be one of the worst thermals of my life, actually. But by this time, it's almost noon, there was this predominant north wind that we had for basically the entire first half of the race. It was quite strong, and it was coming up from the northeast, so it's kind of coming in this direction. And we were able to follow Paul Guschebauer's track and use the lee of all these hills and this plateau to fight that strong north headwind, and managed to fly right into Kimsey. You can see a bit of the wind. It's still, it's pretty windy on the ground there as well. So this was, great. Again, another validation of our decision-making process, what's working. I hadn't totally bombed out at this point, which the Australian team did just before Kimsey. So we were dropping a couple people and making a lot of progress. So I did the mandatory sign. Team was already there. Again, these guys were amazing. That RV, I think the gas pedal was never not on the floor with Norm driving. It was pretty amazing. So. I think, Norm smacked my ass here, didn't he? So here's Kimsey down here. It was about an hour hike up out of town, and he was still blowing 30 kilometers an hour, and managed to do this. Most of the other athletes in front of me had gone to this launch, so I knew where they were going. Jonathan was monitoring, their tracks, and we could see exactly what they were doing. But it was so windy that, you can tell from this track, you could not fly forward. And we were trying to figure out what the most effective route would be, whether we go deep. And like for those of you that are familiar with flying, that's not a nice thermal. You're just literally hucking over the back and kind of praying. I think my ground speed was like 70 kilometers an hour going over the back there. And this turned out to be a really good line through the Northern Alps heading into Leermoos, which is the next turn point, because Logan Walters, the American team, he had chosen a safer route and went farther out in the flats and bombed out. So I actually was able to put about 100 kilometers or 60 or 70 kilometers between myself and him at this point. We later in the race leapfrogged a few times. So had a few low saves in here. Again, the track log here does not show you the sky, obviously, so it got quite shady. And heading up into the Zugspitze Arena, there's this really famous tall mountain there. With that north wind, that means that all of Leermoos was in the lee. So getting up high, it was about 4 meters a second sink for about a 10-minute glide. Then got into Leermoos just ahead of the German team. And again, Norm, Jonathan, Dan, Guillaume, the supporters they're there everywhere. It's like the ultimate paragliding. You can just go wherever you want and you land and there's a van there, and there's just people to look after you. So that's Maximilian Lodi. He's the German team. This guy is hilarious. I spent quite a bit of time flying with him, and I asked him at the end of the race, I said, would you ever do that again? He said, fuck no. So getting out of Leermoos was a comically short hike, literally about 100 meters from the turn point. There's this very shallow sloping field, which I never would have thought would have worked, but one of the cross-country photographers, Felix Rock, I think, this is his home site. He was assuring me, he said, no, this will work. And I thought, there's no way there will work. So it was a bit of a dicey thing, trusting locals. But this time it worked, and literally just levitated up and out of Leermoos. This is about 7:30 or almost 8 o'clock at night, and there's this weird valley convergence that just allows you to literally just levitate up and out of this one area, just in front of high tension power lines. But we were hoping for a much bigger flight out of Leermoos, but it was getting too late. Thermals weren't really working at this point, so basically got as high as we could and then used the valley wind to just do fish downstream and get as far as we could. Maximilian Lodi, who you saw earlier, I saw him land in a very, very bad spot. He was fine, but it was definitely one of the sketchier landings I've ever seen. What was that? That was just day 2. Yeah, so total distance for day 2 was 230 something kilometers, so. Oh, it was quite a long time. Yeah, I think it was a couple months. Yeah. But it honestly didn't help us that much. I mean, we're not over there. We can't scout. We were there a week in advance, and you can't cover that much terrain scouting. And I'd never flown over any of it. Well, a little bit of northern Italy, but you can spend a lot of time on Google Earth and everything trying to scope out some crux points. But at the end of the day, you just got to go. Jeremy, can I get the next video, please?
4:40 a.m. Nice start in the Alps. Moon's still out.
So we started very early. I think I just heard myself saying it was 4:40 something a.m. And what we wanted to do, this is day 3. And this video is going to be basically days 3 through the finish of the race. So we wanted to get into a good position to tag Piz Buin. And it was
coming up on Piz Buin. Just about to tag it. 3,800 meters. Really nice.
So this is one of the highest points I got in the Alps, and managed to tag Pisbuin and cross a couple really gnarly passes before Davos. Flew over Davos to Chur, which is a very, very windy part of the Alps.
All right, here we are.
And there was a thunderstorm just over Chur.
Together.
Socializing a bit.
After 5 hours full speed bar.
5 hours, crazy flying. There's Chur down there. It's only gusting to about 50 kilometers an hour. So we top landed up here, and this sky is getting bright. I think it might be flyable. So hopefully a little bit of team flying.
So that's Maximilian again, and yeah, we just had to land and wait out the thunderstorm. There was literally lightning bolts shooting out of this cloud in front of me, and I figured, okay, I think that's not a good idea. So this is day 4. We launched just above DeSantis, and I quickly got washed straight back down on the ground after about a 1,500 meter hike, and yeah, managed to relaunch out of that small little meadow you just saw, and did another one of these like valley wind convergence levitations up to 3,500 meters, and managed to fly over Andermatt. This is just approaching trim point Fiche, where I got stuck with some airspace that I just could not get over, so I had to hike the last 10 kilometers into Fiche turn point. And I should have known, but there was this notorious weather phenomenon called the Grimsel snake, which Alex told me about like 10 times, and I still didn't listen apparently, because I was at 3,600 meters thinking I must be above this wind coming off this crazy glacier. I'm fine. I'm going to be totally fine. And no. 5 minutes later, I'm on the ground. So tagged Fiche, and then hiked up and spent the night on the mountain. The team brought up all the sleeping gear and all that kind of stuff, and launched on the morning of day 5 at Riederalp. At this point, I was hoping for a nice flight into, I don't know if you guys can see my phone flapping around on the left side there, but had grand plans to fly into Fruitigen, but ended up getting shot down. Jeremy, do you mind just pausing the video for a second?
It was up there. Sky looks
Ended up going in a little bit low into the valley, the Lochen Pass Valley, and probably one of the most turbulent times of the X-Alps, aside from this other time I'll tell you about soon. But decided at that point that I just had enough. I was low in this valley, literally in a washing machine, and decided that if I wanted to live, I should be on the ground. But that involved about a 1,200 meter hike up and over the Lochen Pass, which I was hoping to launch off of, but it was just too windy. It was about 50 kilometers an hour at the top, and clouds are ripping by. It was a little bit overcast and just gnarly. So I decided to hike down a little ways, and I found this little gully. Jeremy, if you want to start the video again, where the last thing I wanted to do was actually walk into Fruitigen.
I think it's launchable out of this little valley here. So I'm going to launch Rigsor up. And hopefully get the hell out of this valley.
So made it after another one of the most turbulent flights of my life, and landed in Fruitigen. And I remember Alex was in the air while I was flying out of that shady canyon. And when I got into Fruitigen, it was amazing. We had this great welcome party, and yeah, that was a good time. I was so glad not to have to walk into Fruitigen.
Turn point 8.
So night of day 5.
Decent.
Yep.
There you go. Oh, that was a tough day.
We were flying, and it was like the valley breeze there for the paragliding school is usually about 30, 35. And when you're over the LZ, you can put the brakes on and easily back up every day in summer. And like just as you get to the ground, it's like enough that you're not. But the old dudes sit there in the hangar on the airfield and drink beer and watch people get dragged, I think, regularly.
The problem was you guys were not landing in the LC, which is about a kilometer forward.
No, I never landed where he did.
And I landed where in the LC on that flight, and it was windy, but it was fine.
But further up the valley, like where James came from, it would have been like the difference between landing at Woodside or landing at Hope further up in Canada. I don't know how you got out of that valley into the headwind. Like when I saw you come out of the valley, I was like, shit. Because I was watching, I was trying to fly and watch on the phone to figure out where James was going to come out. I was quite surprised to see you manage to get out of there. Because it would have been like flying from Hope to Woodside on a very windy day.
It was a huge battle, and my motivation was not walking. So your tolerance starts to dramatically increase when.
Still high when you're in footing, and because you were just okay, I'm going up there now. I'm going up there. And we're saying no, take a rest.
That's right, which turned out to be really good advice, actually. So the end of day 5, we hiked halfway up to Nissen Turn Point. It's 2,000 meters or something. It's a huge hike. So we hiked halfway up the night of day 5 and finished it off in the morning of day 6, where we had one of the possibilities where we could have gotten a serious penalty in the race. I had somehow grabbed the supporter's GPS tracker, and they had the pilot's GPS tracker. So as soon as they started driving down the road, everybody thought that I was in an ambulance. People messaging from here, from Canada, friends from the X-Alps organization, and they were saying, "What's going on?" But I was fine. I was just carrying the supporter's GPS, and they thought something seriously went wrong. So we managed to actually switch that on the back end, and we didn't get a penalty. So it was pretty good. Jeremy, can you start the video again?
Yesterday and the day before.
They were identical. Yeah. So conditions at this point were still flyable, but it was like X-Alps flyable. It was not pleasant flying. So I'm gonna let Pelticats give a little bit of info here.
Some of the most fearful flights of my life. I think today was probably the most fearful. And this is something you actually expect on the X-Alps, but so far we didn't have it. And then finally, bam! Like those days where you would wish you would be on the ground, but anyways, you try to reach the next turn point. So actually, it's very, emotionally difficult. And we had 12 days to do this course, and this was day 6. So if everything was well, tomorrow I will reach goal, which is in 1 week, 1,200 plus kilometers. That's quite something,
So we saw limits which have been pushed very high, and we saw no accidents because only those athletes were pushing so high who really have been able to do so. They have to take the right decisions, whether they land or continue flying.
Since like 2 hours we were flying in really furious wind, like it was 40 km per hour at cloud base or more than this. Sometimes, and at one point I decided to say, okay, stop, it's too much. If I go further than this, it will be difficult. So I decided I had some height, so I wanted to glide. And I succeeded to keep my glider open and just going in between the trees and land. So yeah, it wasn't so nice.
At one point, Maxime was being interviewed, and he was literally as white as a ghost. And I think he had gotten stuck in a narrow valley that was just really windy. And he said that he was actually never going to fly in the X-Alps again. But I think he might have changed his tune. We'll see in the next edition. So this is an interesting and one of the biggest mistakes we made in the race, where it's Martigny, and I had an erroneous track point in my navigation file. So I actually went in the total wrong direction briefly into this really terrible lee side mountain area, thinking that I was going in the right direction, and I wasted about an hour trying to reorient myself. So made it over Martigny, and then got stuck in this area, and there was this lake right down here which was totally white capped because of all the north wind dumping over, and it was totally overcast, but I managed to use that north wind just to survive until the sun came out again.
There it is. Mont Blanc, cruising by it. 3,300 meters. Chamonix right down there. It's very, very nice. Very nice to be flying past and not walking past this massive, massive mountain. Now I just have to get around the corner.
It's relatively smooth flying around the north side of Mont Blanc, but once from the north wind, but once I got around heading into Turn Point Petite Saint Bernard, this was where I almost gift wrapped myself. It was some of the most turbulent flying I've ever been in my life. I think I was almost gift wrapped right around here, and it was just bizarre. You know, just absolutely bizarre. Thankfully, it smoothed out a little bit going into Petite Saint Bernard. So tagged that turn point, hiked with Jonathan up a little hill behind, and we're using that north wind behind Mont Blanc to kind of fly up. And it's settled down a little bit because this is just before the cutoff of no flying, which is at 9 o'clock. And you know, we managed quite a nice little valley glide, and then landed rather high. About 3 minutes, I think, before the cutoff at 9 p.m. So day 7, we covered quite a bit of territory as well. We flew down the Aosta Valley, which is a very notorious windy area, tagged Dufour Spitz, and then got into northern Italy and basically wound up near Locarno at the end of the day. Right around here was a particularly interesting part of my flight where I got funneled into a little valley and started kicking treetops and chimneys basically for 5 minutes with a glide perfectly matching terrain. And I thought if I was ever going to wind up in a tree in the X-Alps, that was going to be it. But it was just literally pure luck that kept me out of it. So another 150K flight on day 8. This is kind of along the Lake Como range, Sondrio Valley area. And at the end of this, I landed right near the Cima Tosa turn point around here. But what was really nice was right at the beginning, there was a big valley crossing, and the Japanese team that I had launched with, he didn't make it. By really nice, I mean good for me, Scheisenfreude. So I put a nice 100K gap between myself and the Japanese team, and managed to cover some serious distance. So to put the big race into perspective, this was the day that Kriegel made goal. And I just don't know how that's possible. It's totally, totally insane. So day 9 started with Jonathan and I hiking up the Cima Tosa turn point, Italian Dolomites. It's some of the most picturesque terrain ever. And once we were over the pass, we basically walked into a white room. So there were clouds, early morning clouds kind of building and dissipating, but that launch was down that rocky canyon with big rock walls on either side. So aside from race rules, I wanted to be able to see exactly where I was going. To top it off, the launch was this tiny little helipad with a sheer drop on the other side. And with a bit of Jonathan's help there holding my wing, I was able to get off. But my wing was far from actually pressurized by the time I got to the edge, and managed to pull it off. But it was a pretty epic day, and went on for another 70K flight after that. Day 10 was not a big day distance-wise, but very cool as we passed the Via Ferrata section. And I got to give a huge shout out to Scott Flavelle from Pemberton. He had gotten to the Via Ferrata a couple days in advance and scouted the whole route and basically acted as my tour guide when we showed up there. So Scott's leading the pack here. Trevor Kessler is right behind me taking this video. And pretty epic part of the race. These are World War II era tunnels. And from here, it was just a short glide down into Sexton. And by this point in the race, I was feeling pretty haggard. I'm not going to lie. It was, earlier in this day, I had launched earlier, did a sled ride, and knew I had to run about 25 kilometers to get to this turn point instead of waiting an extra couple kilometers or waiting a couple extra hours to wait for the day to turn on. But Logan Walters was right behind me, so he actually caught up to me at this turn point. He managed to fly in, but I had ran about 30 kilometers in total.
Well done, bro.
So maintained my lead, but didn't really make anything more than that. So day 11, I think I set a new distance record for the shortest distance covered in the X-Alps, 24 kilometers or something like that along course line. And I had big plans for a flight into the finish at this point. You know, we're getting within striking distance, but the weather just wasn't cooperating. Big hike up in the morning and got to the top, and it was, 50K winds. So day 12, where are we? Day 12, basically, I could walk it in at this point, so I knew I was going to finish the X-Alps. Dan and I, at this point, had to hike up and over the Grossglockner Pass, which the peak is about 3,000 meters or so.
Yeah, buddy.
So serious hike up, and this is an interesting launch because I'm actually facing towards the mountain on that one. This is just a little knob I'm launching off of. So now the predominant wind was from the south. It was just ripping down there. There's no way we could launch higher up. Had to hike quite far down, and launched and then had a sled ride to get me within walking distance of Schmittenhoe, which was the second to last turn point. And this is the final glide down into the raft at ZLMC. Earlier in the day, as in like an hour earlier, there was a big thunderstorm and it was still just dumping wind through the ZLMC valley. And on a half bar, my ground speed was about 8 to 10 kilometers an hour. So it was extremely windy, and I didn't quite make the raft. Very close, literally with a couple meters. But it was quite windy. Jonathan came in and landed a little bit later, and he made it on the raft. So, showed me up. And that's it. There we were. It made it. I was very stoked to still be alive, and I got to admit, at the beginning of the race, all the training and everything leading up to the race, I never actually thought I was going to finish. The finish rate previously was like 10% or something, and I never really acknowledged this consciously to myself, but it was always just kind of subconsciously back of the mind, like, oh, I'm going to do the X-Alps, but I'm not actually going to finish. So getting here to the finish was just, it was pretty epic. And again, I got to say thank you to everybody who supported, because even though I'm the only one flying, there's no way I would have made it past day 3 without incredible supporters and and everybody back home, financially, advice, equipment, all the support that we had was amazing. So to wrap up, who's next?
You did a good sales job.
It was great. It was totally easy. I won't do the next edition, just not so much due to the race, but just due to my my life situation right now. With 2 kids, even this race, I picked literally the worst phase of my life to actually do the X-Alps. When I started the race, my youngest was 3 months old, and it obviously offloaded a lot of my daddy time and all responsibilities, professionally, personally, and everything, onto my partner, and she did, she had to do a lot. So it's better to ask her if I can do the X-Alps again. In reality, in a couple years, maybe for 2027, I don't know. But at the same time, I would like to be a supporter. I would like to support somebody. Whoever wants to do the X-Alps, maybe not anybody, but I would extend my offer as a supporter, because I know what it's like as the pilot side, and being a supporter doesn't require the same time commitment and energy commitment leading up to the race for the year before the race. But knowing what I know now, I could show up, obviously do scouting, do a bit of course studying and everything, and be, I think, a good supporter. So that's an offer I'll extend to anybody, and hopefully there's a taker.
How many competitors started? And how many finished?
Yeah, so the race originally, there was 35 athletes selected, and now it's almost entirely professional athletes. There are very few people like myself whose job is not paragliding related, and who are just privateers, amateurs, rookies, in this race. So there was 35, and then I think by the time the race started, a few dropped out. So there's 32 in the race, 23 finished, and there was some injuries and eliminations and whatnot along the way. Yeah. There's no takers yet. Come on. Yeah, nutrition obviously is really big. You're burning 7,000 calories a day, and I at the beginning of the race tried to eat as much as I could, and I asked Dan, who was doing all the cooking, I said, basically just make me pasta every night. By like the fourth night, I could not stand to look at pasta, and I instantly regretted that that direction. So kind of switched to a lot of smoothies, a lot of shakes, easier to digest. By day 5, I think my appetite was just, not there, but you have to eat. So it's just more of a kind of forcing the food in. But shakes are a lot easier than solid food to get in. So by the end of the race, I was primarily doing shakes. And quick side note, I was doing a lot of protein shakes, and we ran out of protein powder. So so at one point Dan went and just got some random protein powder, and I didn't really agree with everything. So pro tip, if anybody's training, you gotta dial in your training so you know exactly even what you're eating, because minor details like that can throw an interesting wrench into your race. And Dan was never walking behind me at any point after that.
So is Kriegel human or AI?
Yeah, I don't know. Kriegel's insane. Like his ability to just keep himself cool, calm, and collected through some of the most gnarly conditions. Pino Palticats, Palticats is the acro world champion. He, if anybody, can handle rough conditions, and he obviously got scared a few times, decided to land a few times, got too rough, and Kriegel essentially can fly in anything, and when he lands, he's fine. He's not shooting bricks. So, but this is also his backyard. Fruitigan, one of the turn points, is literally where he's from. So he's extremely familiar with the terrain, and just, the best hike and fly pilot in the world. I mean, yeah, he might be Terminator or something, I'm not sure.
How did you figure out you're the best bad conditions pilot anyone's ever seen?
Yeah.
I think before he did this, he was practicing flying in wave in a paraglider. He had some special glider, and he was trying to fly in wave with some glider would do 70+ kilometers an hour. Like hang gliders struggle with this.
He practices in
flying in rain.
the stories about him practicing are just crazy.
And all that stuff, so it's different level.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was how did I realize when I had a false turn point in my track log? And it was Jonathan who was doing the flight following. He was basically asked on the radio, he was like, "Where are you going? Like, what are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm 5 kilometers from this turn point, or from the waypoint in my navigation track log." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am." And there was this long discussion, relatively, I guess, short discussion. And we quickly realized, wait a minute, I was flying along, and then all of a sudden, I got my one waypoint, and I'm going 90 degrees, which I knew there was a turn in that area, so it seemed somewhat logical. But that area around Martigny, it was very windy, and I was over top, high enough over top of that gnarly mountain that I was okay, wasn't totally in the lee, but it was still extremely rowdy. So I was struggling trying to get out onto the windward side of the mountain, and simultaneously trying to use my phone, trying to figure out what's going on. And I'd spent so much time just staring at my cockpit in these crazy conditions that I got a little bit disoriented, and I was literally looking at 5 valleys and saying, okay, I think it's that valley. And it took a long time for me to get the updated track log that had that point, that erroneous point, deleted. And yeah, it was quite a process. But side note, David Temachuk wrote this script that basically was this little software tool that allowed us to update these track logs so fast. And basically, when I was flying, I could get a WhatsApp message with the track log file, just click it, and it would automatically open up into XE-Track, and I would instantly have my bearings. So before that, I would be literally trying to plot a course while flying, or Jonathan would be trying to figure it out on the ground and then send it to me, and it just became this total cluster of trying to navigate. But David Temachuk was able to do this like wizardry, which was amazing. Yeah, it was a huge help. So it was a quick solution to issues like this, where we need to update my navigation file really quick. And it took a little bit of time to figure it out, but it could have been a lot worse.
Are you flying alone a lot of the time, or are you inside of somebody?
Yeah, so the question is, am I flying alone a lot? And yes, yeah, flying alone the vast majority of the time. Around the southern Alps, so northern Italy, Dufour Spitz, Aosta Valley and everything, there was nobody flying because nobody would or should be flying. It was just, conditions were just brutal. And there's a saying in the Alps where if you don't see any other paragliders in the air, like, why are you in the air? This is not a place you want to be. And yeah, very rarely saw any other paragliders on that section, and very rarely saw other paragliders at all. Once we were kind of past the start and out of the German area.
We've got a question from online, from YouTube, which is, did you ever get sort of lost when you were on the ground, like about route finding on the ground?
A few times, for sure. Yeah, there's a funny story of me like wanting to throw my phone into a field full of thorns and prickles because I was in that field full of thorns and prickles trying to, that were about 10 feet high, so I couldn't see anything. And I was messaging, I think it was Dan or Jonathan at the time, and I kept on saying, like, I need a track log, I need to get out of this field. I'm literally bushwhacking through prickles. And I started to get more and more agitated. And after about 5 minutes, I was just, it's probably the one point I was seriously, they did an amazing job. And they like, for every wrong decision we made 10 good ones. So in the whole, it was great. But this one time I was like, I was furious because I think it was Jonathan said, well, just take that one path. And he was looking at a satellite map that had clearly been, taken months before. All these prickles had grown. And I'm like, what path? I can't see anything. And he's like, just take the path on your left. I'm like, well, what if I turn this way? Then we're, yeah, there were a couple moments. But again, I mean, the 99% of the time, we were pretty dialed in with navigation. But in total, my distance covered on the ground was almost exactly 450 kilometers over the 11 or 12 days. So that averages out to a marathon a day. And a few wrong turns here and there, but generally we did okay.
Was the cell phone coverage pretty much everywhere, or were you out of coverage at times?
Yeah, for flying, surprisingly, we had cell coverage, I would say 80% of the time. We had, 80% of the time while flying, and on the ground we had cell coverage. There were a few times where we were using InReach, which those of you know, it's it's painfully slow sometimes to get or send a message. So that was our backup, and the Red Bull, the race organization, was sponsored by CAT cell phones, and their claim to fame was that they, had this satellite messaging that was very reliable and available in almost any area. Well, it turns out in the race, they really did not work. So that was supposed to be our primary means of communication, and it ended up just, we never really used it at all. But it's for that reason, is because cellular coverage is not absolutely everywhere, but is in most spots. So. Smell in the van at the end of the trip was really bad. Oh yeah, I was going through, 6 or 7 pairs of running shoes every day. Just leave them, I would huck them in the van, close the door. Those poor guys. Yeah. Yes.
Like psychologically, you're not doing, like you just finished this, you work towards this, and then what happens after?
Yeah, it was, there's definitely, coming off a race like this or an event like this is a lot. I didn't really have much time. We finished the race, we packed up, returned the RV, jumped on planes, came back home, and I had 2 kids, thrown on my lap, and said I could not complain. I was like, whatever I said, just do not complain, do not complain. So it honestly wasn't until putting this presentation together recently that I really processed everything. This is 9 months, or 10 months, or whatever later, that that I kind of relived everything, because I literally got off the plane to get home, and I didn't fly for, I got a couple hours in a few months, basically. So. Yeah, it was good. It was good. A little bit therapeutic to do this presentation, because it was a chance to relive everything. And like I said, since Jonathan's death, going through this whole process has been it's been good. But I didn't have the blues in the sense of some people say, coming off an event like this, you're actually depressed or anything like that. For me, I just kind of switched gears and went into normal life. Yeah. Alex?
You differently next time. Like, say if you were doing it again, and you were going into the same race, but you had some of the knowledge you have now, what would be the big things you'd change, if any?
Yeah, not much. I would say that I would have somebody remote behind a computer screen or 10, and chilling at a desk, not bouncing around in the back of a van, and I don't either, and Jonathan literally spent 18 hours a day in the back of an RV staring at 2 computer screens, and that was the strategy role. He had to be there giving all this information. So I think having somebody remote, that role didn't necessarily need to be in the RV. That role could have been somebody anywhere in the world, preferably in the same time zone, but just feeding data, and route planning and all that kind of stuff where they're comfortable. I don't know if I needed 4 supporters. Even if you remove that one, I think you could probably do this race if you wanted to keep costs down with 2 supporters, I would say, is a minimum. I think 3 is probably more ideal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but not much. I mean, there's not too many major changes I would have made. Maybe a smaller van as well, and definitely, if life situations permitted, I would do more scouting, because 95% of that race I had never flown over that terrain. So ideally, spend a couple months in the Alps and just do the whole course. Yeah, I don't think so. There's basically 2 races within the X-Alps. One is the Europeans, and they're racing for podium or for position, and everybody else is essentially just trying to survive. And like I mentioned earlier, just making it to goal is amazing, and that is a goal, but I never really thought that was going to be possible in my case. So the fact that we made it based on having some flyable weather pretty much almost every single day made that possible. But the Europeans are just on a different planet. It's their home turf. They know the terrain. They know the weather systems. We had these valley wind maps. There were huge PDF files that we're trying to look at, and you get these convergence areas. And if you're on, on one side of the valley versus the other side of the valley, it's the difference between going down at 4 meters a second and bombing, or carrying on for another 200-kilometer flight. So it's, local knowledge is invaluable, and I think that, the more familiar you are with that area is obviously a huge asset. So, I mean, if you made it a full-time job and you spent a year training, studying the course, all these little nuanced transitions and everything that you have to do, I would say that there's potentially a chance of a non-European placing top 10.
Based on the previous X-Alps, how do you make it? So the fact that you did is hats off.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks. Yeah, so maybe a couple more questions if we have them, but if not, happy to wrap it up. And thanks everybody for coming out. This was again a long time coming. So yeah, thank you. And we collectively need to get somebody else to do this. So let's make it happen. What's that? Yeah, we have a Canadian in the X-Pier this year. Yeah, and I've talked to him a bit, and I think that he has the skills, and I think he has the majority of the crazy factor that's required to do this kind of stuff. Because it's, we'll see. I hope he does. I think it's a goal of his after the X-Pier, and maybe I'll be supporting him in the next one. I heard a funny, I think it was one of the head advanced guys. He said, somebody asked him, if he would ever do the X-Alps, and he was like, no way, I'm not depressed enough. And I was like, oh, I think it might be, never considered myself really depressed, but I think you might have a point. Yeah. Going once, going twice? Okay, guys, thank you everybody for coming out. Appreciate it.
Coming to do that. Super awesome achievement, man. Freaking epic. You should be super proud of yourself. All right, guys, well, that's it. There might be one more at the end of this month. I don't want to say who, what, where, but we will let you know. Other than that, we're going to be breaking right into our flying season and hope to see everybody out on the hill. All right, so thank you again for coming out. That's it.